the soul remembers, right? And so, with that being said, hold on 1 minute. Something's wrong with my PowerPoint. Okay. So when we talk about the soil and how we utilize the soil within our magic, one of the things we do is we go back to a deeper understanding of the individuals who were there before we were. And so I like to think about the African Americans or the Africans and how all of this is became embedded within the work that we're doing today. So we think about the European influences, we think about the Native American influences, but we also think about, our own the African impressions or the influences that the Africans, led into this whole gumbo pot of understanding. And so when the Africans were enslaved and they came over and they brought their own sensibilities in terms of how they dealt with spirituality, how they dealt with conjure and culture and different things like that, the understanding was always, now we're here in this place. How do we make things fit here? And as we know, within the slave trade, at first it was just Africans from one specific place, right? And then as they were able to communicate with each other, the worry became, what if there's mutiny? What if there is any type of insurrection? So you have people from different other tribal groups coming together. And so they had their own understanding of the god or goddess, sensibilities. And so, how do we put that into our life here? How are we able to deal with our own spirituality, our own medical needs, and even the trauma of just being, enslaved? How do we deal with all of that? And so, hoodoo itself became that arena, that workforce, that thing that was to gravitate and pull all of these individuals together. And so even though we talk about it in terms of being, so much of a closed practice, we understand that folk magic has its way of being in many different areas of the world. It's just that hoodoo itself specifically is this sympathetic magic that is in the arena of African Americans, because it does deal with liberation and our need to be liberated. So people ask me, well, then who is inherently hoodoo? Then who is that? Who is the person that is inherently hoodoo? Well, the indigenous people, right, with that DNA that is connected to this colonization, this being pulled through colonization. But also, we have to have this understanding that these people did not just travel straight from one place to another place. There were many stopping points. So they brought with them many different understandings of how to incorporate where they were or where they were going into their magic. And so I always say it's the descendants of those people, right, that are inherently hoodoo. That doesn't mean that you can't practice folk magic and not be a person of color, because folk magic is magic within your own lineage, within your own culture, your own heritage. It's just that hoodoo itself is the liberation magic that stemmed from the subjugation of African Americans or Africans in America, right? And the farther that the Africans moved from their beginnings, from wherever they were in West Africa or in different parts of Africa, then there was less of an understanding of, what those specific roots were, what those specific shoots were, what those specific needs were. And we needed to understand how to examine and understand and be able to make peace with where we are now. So I show this particular map because it just denotes different places the Africans went. Especially, I pay attention to the New Orleans area, which is where I'm from, New Orleans. And so, leaving from the coast of Africa, and of course, traveling over into the United States, over into the southern parts of the world of North America, we see that Africans still went from many different places, right? And so within my own family, there is a lot of West African lineage, there's Nigerian, and there's lineage from Ghana, but then there's also lineage from Honduras in my family. So there's Brazil. So there's a lot of different pieces that comes into the magic. And so when you start to work the magic, you may see similar things that look like things that you were, involved with in another place or another, particular time. They start to overlap and look similar. So we talk about that, and then people wonder, okay, well, we buy all of these books, we buy books about magic, and hoodoo and whatever you're into. But and then we wonder, what can we do, right? What is it that we can do that shows that we appreciate the work, and what is it that we do that might show that we are being an appropriator of the work? And so one of the things that I always like to talk about is working with cards, whether it's playing cards for divination, if you're doing divination for groupings of people, or even if you're doing divination just for yourself. That is an overlap because that's a folk magic thing. I talk to a lot of other diviners who are not people of color, right? And they also use playing cards. So if you start to feel like, okay, I want to step more into more folk magic, right? But I don't want to, seem as though I'm overstepping my bounds. Then you always ask, right? But playing cards is one of those things that we can all share in learning, the parts of how to divine with them, and how to utilize them in our magic for whatever that might look like for you. In my book I had a slide, but I guess I lost it. But it was earlier on in this presentation, but I made two copies of this presentation and it's probably in the other copy. But anyhow, my book, Conjuring the Calabash, Empowering Women with Hoodoo Spells and Magic, I list at the end of each chapter different examples on how to use card magic in your work, right? And so that book will be out November 8th. And I'm so excited with Llewellyn. So cards are something that anybody can do. So if you were to pick up that book and you said, okay, you got to this at the end of this chapter and it talked about these card magic tips, this juju on the fly, and I wanted to do it, then that would be okay if you were not a person of color, right? You could still do that. La Madama, the other image that I showed, the statue on the side, the lady with the broom, and she's got the basket on her head. That might be something where a person who is not a person of color might feel like, well, that's an arena for me to step back from. And it's not like somebody's trying to use reverse racism or be prejudiced against a certain group. But when you know the history of La Madama as a person herself, who it represents this woman who works inside this plantation home, right? But she is also the go-between for the individuals who work in the field, as well as the Maroons who are hiding off in the woods, who are waiting for their chance to escape, slavery, or to have some kind of to burn the fields, insurrection on the plantation. So she is this woman who is trusted enough by the people in the house that they allow her to do all this traveling. But she is also sort of the matriarch of this movement to be free. And so you would have to ask yourself, is she an example of an individual that I would find myself wanting to work with? How does that feel okay for me? Now, if you're not a person of color, what you surely can do, and I have oftentimes prescribed this for clients, is that you can write a letter to La Madama, right? And you can use this letter that you write for La Madama and place it inside of, soil, right? And when you place this letter for La Madama inside the soil, what you're saying is that you're thanking her. You're writing a letter saying that you're thanking her for her involvement, for her nurturing of individuals of the freedom and the liberation movement, and that you don't see a need for a racial hierarchy in the world, and so you appreciate her work that she's done for people of color. You don't have to go out and get a statue of her. You don't have to have a photo of her on a shrine, but you can definitely do that. Write a letter to her and place it inside the soil as a person, and that is not an appropriation thing. That is really a show of appreciation, a show of support, and that's an example to do that. Another example would be Mother Catherine Seals. An image of Mother Catherine Seals. I keep an image of Mother Catherine Seals on my shrine when I'm doing work. But she is a woman from New Orleans who was in the spiritualist movement, who herself lived in the lower ninth ward, and she had went to a faith healer, a man at the time who was white, who was a well-known faith healer, because she was, dealing with a lot of adversity in her own life, right? As a woman with children, trying to her own struggles, and she was turned away because she was a Black woman. And so from that moment on, she decided that she would start her own temple, right? And within her temple, she would welcome anybody. So she had Black people, white people, anybody who wanted to come. they went to Mother Catherine Seal. So she is definitely a person that if you wanted to work with her, if you are a woman of any color, and you say for instance you were dealing with an abusive relationship, or you just needed to feel like you even if it was the boss you felt like was were beating you down because you're a female or you are of feminine energy, right? Then you could definitely work with Mother Catherine Seals, to gathering that soil, and using that soil, thanking that soil, that earth, that she traveled on. And we know that the soil, we can't say that we have to just go to New Orleans to get that soil, but you could go to New Orleans in the Ninth Ward and collect some soil, or you could collect some soil from where you live, have an image of Mother Catherine Seals, and leave it near that soil. And what I would like to do is leave it near that soil for maybe 9 nights, right? I like to use nine. It is Oya's number, the number of transformation, and sit with that soil and talk to Mother Catherine Seals about what it is that you would like to have, manifest for you in your life in terms of turning that situation from, one that's sort of bad or lopsided to something that is more, good or gracious or abundant in your life. So you could definitely do that. So I always tell people, if you feel in the pit of your stomach that, this particular working, is not for you, it doesn't speak to you, that it feels like it might be overstepping your bounds, then don't do that. But there are lots of things, especially in my book, that anybody can involve themselves with and can do. And so it doesn't have to be a person of color. But that was just those some examples of some things that that might be glaring, right? Maybe that one's not for me, but there are ways you can approach those things that will have it where you don't look like you're being making fun or just feeding into a stereotype. So we always want to lead with respect. Well, whatever we do, we want to make sure that we lead with respect. And so the first three are some biggies for me, right? Do I understand the significance of what I'm doing? Am I honoring this culture or simply imitating it? Am I perpetuating the stereotype that might hurt others who belong to this culture? So what am I doing? Exactly what am I doing? Am I doing this because I feel that by doing this, I am helping to eliminate this idea that one group of people is better than another group of people? Or do I see this as sort of as dress up, something like that? And in the past, I've had clients who felt like, well, they were going to have, they felt like they had tried to do some readings or some things on their own. They came to me, they wanted to talk. It wasn't generally for a reading or divination or anything like that, but they themselves were readers, right? And so they came to me and they said, well, I was getting ready to have this reading, and I felt like I wanted to make the person of color who was coming to them feel at ease or at home or whatever, feel more comfortable, coming into their home. And so they decided to go out and purchase, some cowrie shell earrings and a cowrie shell necklace. And so they thought that, by doing all these things, and maybe even braiding their hair, that this would make the person feel comfortable. And so I say, well, how, if you were that person, how would you receive that? And so they sat there for probably about 10 minutes, and it's like, oh, and then oh, I see what you're saying. If it's not something that you would usually do because, you have this understanding, you feel you really understand this, then don't do that. Just come as you are. We don't have to play dress up with each other. We have to respect each other and get to know each other. And the way to get to know a person is through just talking to them about the cultural aspects that you may find or that are a little, that might be different, right? And so, and even with hoodoo, within the compendium of hoodoo, there are lots of overlaps. So if there's something that, even something like bone throwing, lots of different cultures do that. The way that someone does it in the United States may be totally different, and is totally different than the way someone would do it in Africa, or the way somebody would do it in, any European country. But you still bring your own nuance to it, and you can be appreciative and you can celebrate the way they do it and still feel good about the way you do things. Okay. So Frederick Douglass, and is one of the, I guess, when you practice hoodoo, when you study hoodoo for so long, one of the first stories that you hear is the story about Frederick Douglass, right? Frederick Douglass in his autobiography, probably even more than when you hear about his autobiography, right? You hear about Frederick Douglass running off into the woods, right? I love this story, so I'm getting all excited even just having to say it. But he's off in the woods, and so he sees Sandy Jenkins, right? This older man who's in the woods, who is a Maroon, right? He is someone who has run off into the woods. He's been living there with his people, right? He's doing his thing, and so he sees a young Frederick Douglass in the woods, and he's like, "You're going," basically, trying to get him to go back. Um, he's telling him that you're going to basically get worn down. You're going to get tired. You can't do this. You can't be here like this. You're going to have to go back. Or else they'll catch you, and God knows what'll happen to you. So he tells him, but here, before you go back, I want you to take this route, right? The High John the Conqueror route. And he tells him to place that route in his pocket. And when you do get back, Sandy Jenkins tells Frederick, when you do get back, you'll find that this route is going to let everybody else know who you are. And it's going to definitely let you know what you are, right? And Frederick Douglass is so enthralled with Sandy Jenkins. He is so mesmerized, I would say, in whatever Sandy Jenkins is selling. He has bought it, right? And he even says that this man had this religion for which he had no name for it, right? So he takes it and he goes back. And so when he goes back, he Covey passes him up, the man who's the slave breaker, right? He passes him up. He just goes off. And Frederick Douglass is thinking, well, maybe it's because, it's a church day, maybe that's it. I don't know yet if it's this route, right? The next day, he and Covey do get into a skirmish, right? And they do fight for over 2 hours. And they're tussling, and everything. And so finally, the tussling stops. And Covey just can't believe it. And he just gets up and he goes about his way. And Frederick Douglass says that it was at that point that he recognizes that he is a man. He is no longer a slave. He is a man. And the story of High John the Conqueror, the fact that it is that root that is the basis for me of hoodoo and for a lot of hoodoo practitioners, it is the basis of a lot of workings, is because the story of it is also tied into the story of enslavement. We talk about this prince who is living in Africa, who decides that he has to come to this new world because he has dreamed over and over again, over every night, of the fact that, and he is also a conjurer in Africa, right? But he has dreamed over and over for the same amount of time, right? Over and over again, of this place where this enslavement is not what happens when they get into tribal warfares with other groupings of people. This is just heinous to him. And so he talks to his father, who is also a conjurer, and he says he needs to go there. And so he does travel to the New World, and he whispers his story into the root. And so the story of liberation, the story of salvation, is always waiting to be awakened within the root. So the root is a very pertinent part of the practice. And so, a lot of people, hold it close, hold it close when you talk about liberation. So the soil does remember. The soil remembers everything that we do. The soil remembers every impression. If we're happy, if we're sad, whatever it is that we're dealing with, the soil will remember it. And so when we think about that, then we think about the First Nations people. We think about everyone who has traveled, even in our yards, right? The homes that we live in, the homes that we may have lived in, if it's not the same home when we grow up, right? Even when we go off to college, that land, that soil, right? All of these students in and out, the ones who graduate and the ones who don't, right? All of it. And so it harbors all of that. The soil has all of that information embedded within it. And so as occultists, as magicians, as soothsayers, we all are also historians to a certain extent. And so it would be wise for us to always research the soil. And for me, I like to meditate. I'll take the jar of earth and I'll meditate over that. And I have gone to sleep and I've seen images of different women and men who traveled, some who were happy, right? Some who were sad, and a lot of those impressions, they stick with me. And so I start to work with that soil. I give it gratitude. I say thank you to the earth. And then I use it within however I'm going to use it within my workings. Like I say, for an example, with my son, when my son was dealing with a bully at school, we use some of the soil from the yard in the glass jar, in the mason jar, small jar. It could be a spaghetti jar. You don't have to buy mason jars. I mean, whatever jar you want to use. And we put some soil in there. And the soil that we use was in part soil that I had meditated with prior, because I keep different jars of soil around the home. And what I'll do is I'll label, I'll put labels on the soil from my dreams, right? From my meditations and my dreams. And so this particular meditation led me to a woman who had been, she had been enslaved, and she had some children, but there was one child that died, and she was a wet nurse at the time. And so that means she was taking care of the master's children. She had to use all of her breast milk to feed their babies. So by the time she was able to go back to where she was living, right, she didn't have enough nourishment within her for her own child. And so the baby died. And so she was just back and forth in one spot, just traveling back and forth over this land until her husband came, and the man she was with. I'm not going to say husband because I don't, how far we want to go with enslaved people's marriages, because sometimes they were just put on as a force. But the man she was with, I'll call him her husband. I will. Her husband was taking her and saying that we can, it's time for us to go. So I was brought to the image that they were, escaping. They were escaping enslavement. They were runaways, right? But the last impression was that, this baby, this child, had been buried in this place that she kept trampling over, and she needed to be recognized through this soil work. And so I sat with the soil, and I lit a candle, and I wrote her a letter letting her know how sorry, I was that she, had lost her child, but that I was also the mother, living in this area where the soil came from my backyard, and the mother of, 5 children, and that I needed protection for one of them, and I put it inside of the soil with the High John the Conqueror root. I put that root in the soil as well, and then I lit the candle and I set it on top of the jar. And I did that for 9 nights. And then after that, he said, he just didn't have any more problems with the kid. He would see the kid. It was kind of like the Frederick Douglass story, right? And it was as if, the kid didn't even recognize him, right? Didn't even see him. So I say that to say that, when we use soil, wherever we are, we respect you. You start to find yourself respecting the land more when you use it in your work. Wherever you go, you start to find pockets of soil that you want to just put in Ziploc bags and take back and figure out what is the basis for this. Who walked across this. What impressions am I going to get from this? So there are lots of ways to do that. I meditate with it. I sit up for about 15 minutes, with the candle, and I just sit there and just wait for whatever comes, right? Then I go to sleep. And I usually try in the mornings to write down any impressions that I get. And so all of those things with the lady didn't happen, at once, but they started to happen little by little by little. First I would see her face. And then I would see her, crying and holding this baby, this lifeless baby. And the burial of the baby came. And so then I understood what would happen there. So, like I say, I label, put a little writing on it, and I say, um, mother, child, enslaved. I write a little something about it, so I can remember, okay, this was this soil, right? And so I'm going to use it for this purpose. And so it sat there for probably about 4 or 5 months before I actually used it in that working, for my son. And so, I would encourage everyone to, sort of just get out there and gather some soil, but also do some research on the places that call you, to gather soil, wherever it is, even if it's, at a park or, near a bank, some places you may have to go at night, but, to gather those things, those implements, and use those implements within your work. And you will find that just using something like soil, which doesn't cost you a lot of money, right? will, help to boost your magic, right? I have even used jars of soil for work, when who was it? A friend of mine was getting married, and so she knew she was going to get married at this particular park. And so this place has a beautiful kind of like a botanical garden area, And so I took some soil from that area and I put it in a jar, and I wrote a little note about love, right? About sustaining love, and sprayed it with some perfume. And then I put a little cologne on it as well, stuck it down in that soil, decorated the jar so it's really pretty, tied it up in some cloth. And I gave her that as a remembrance, right? That wasn't my only gift to her, but that was a mystical, magical gift that she could keep to help keep their love stable, right? And so things like that, that you could do. There were some other implements that I remember putting in there. Like I may have put some rose petals in there. I did put a Hijana conqueror root in there, but also some rose petals in there. And like I say, tied it up really pretty, put a little bow on it, and and she says that, every time she passes in a room when she's doing things in a room, making the bed or whatever, she just feels this extreme joy about the fact that they're married and they've been married for 7 years. So there are lots of ways that we can use soil to help liberate ourselves, liberate others, help other people feel that they have a connection to the universe, that they have a right to be here. So honoring that soil as well, honoring those first who traveled there first, and then also getting into the sensation of helping other people connect to the land that they're at as well. Because if you feel a disconnect within your home, within the place where you work, sometimes it could be about not honoring that soil. Even if you're going to start a business somewhere, you want to first do something where you honor the soil. You're moving to a new home or a new apartment, do a ritual for that soil and find out, okay, when I'm here, I want abundance of love. I want an abundance of financial gain. Whatever it is that you're looking for, you can have those things by doing this type of soil work. And I'm going to look and see if I see any questions. Oops, wait a minute. All right. And so another thing with the soil is feeding the earth. And so that one is a good one. And so before I use the soil, sometimes I do a feeding of the earth. And I forgot to say this earlier when I was talking about soil work, but you definitely want to make sure that you check to find out before you start digging anywhere with your gas company, and so you won't hit any live wires and anything like that. But those are things that I do as well. So I'll feed the earth once a year. And so whatever 9 things that you have, 9 or more, that you would like to, when you put in that hole and cover it, that lets the all of the energy of that earth know that that you are thankful. And you will find everywhere you travel, you feel blessed. The wind will blow differently, the trees will sway a certain way, because you're taking it upon yourself to love the earth as well as you love your craft. All right. And I think that is my time. I see I have had a strong feeling to use soil to ask for forgiveness for my grandmother. Yes, yes. Yeah, I use, yes, you still can use any soil. You sure can. And that you can use any soil you want. You don't have to use the soil just there. What I would do is I would write her name. If you have a picture, you can take a picture of your grandmother and put it on the jar or whatever you're using. Photocopy it and put it in the soil, a copy of the picture in the soil. So you can use that. Oh, thank you guys for showing up. Hey, Stephanie. All right. Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Oh, thank you. And like I said, my book will be out November 8th, Conjuring the Calabash, Empowering Women with Hoodoo Spells and Magic. And it has spells up in there for men too. Don't get all scared. Don't get scared off of your mail. But there's spells in there for us to work with our men. The